Well, hello there, friends. Honorary QA tester Mystery here, and today it's time to resume with the bug testing, or the bug exposing. Hopefully, we can get another really solid round of bug fixes like we got out of Fatshark last time. If you were unaware, last time around we pointed out, I think, like 4 bugs, maybe even 5 bugs in the video, and all of them were just completely collapsed within the next patch. So kudos to Fatshark, good job on that front, and hopefully my, like, just sort of like pointed direction is like, oh, this is pretty similar to the Soul Drinker bug, like hopefully that helped. Gonna be doing a very similar thing today, and as I mentioned in the last video, today's video is going to be all about enemy-based bugs. So everything here is something that I have found or other players have found for me and submitted footage of, and we're just going to have like a multimedia presentation of several different, I think like 5 or 6 different bugs that are currently going on. Now, some of these are very new and very minor, and some of them are very old and very major and can have big impacts on the game, and might have a lot more complicated sort of sources in terms of their complexity. And a couple of them are debatably like, okay, that might just be like a game feature because it's kind of always been that way, but I'll make the argument that yeah, we can do better than that because other games, especially Vermintide 2, have done better. So we're going to start with some very easy basic stuff at the bottom end and work our way towards those very complicated and deadly bugs at the top. And by the way, my little bit of audience engagement here is, if you have a bug that you want me to take a look at and perhaps address in a future video, I don't necessarily have like a idea for like the genre of bug that you could submit, but whatever you got, tell them to me, put them in the comments. Of course, my members in the Discord have been very big help in helping me track these down and do some testing on them, so kudos to them. And yeah, let's get started here. Let's start with some stuff that has to do with Stagger, and we got 2 different ones that have to do with Stagger here, and we're going to start with the one that I think is a little bit funnier and a little bit harder to notice, I think, and that is something that has only started to occur in just this last patch, as far as I've noticed, and this has to do with bosses. So bosses, since the Expeditions patch came out, they're stunned when they're staggered. Like they get knocked out of their animations. So look at this Chaos Spawn, right? This is his default idle animation. I'm currently invisible to him, and so this is what he does when nothing is around, right? So he's gonna come at me like this, and then watch what happens when I stun him with this rock. Okay, watch what happens when I stun him with this rock. Okay, watch what happens when I hit him in the head and stun him with this rock. Okay, I got one more try. Here we go. Boom. Okay. You see that like ever so slight pause there? I can do it by taunting him too. It's not as obvious when I taunt him, but let's swap it up to the Plague Ogre, who it's even more obvious on when this sort of thing happens. I can refresh my stun here, and when I taunt this guy and set him back, you see that very slight delay where he resets like the default stance there, and that is even more pronounced when, of course, they get hit with the rock, and it'll be even more pronounced with something else in a second. Where is he? Let's beat him in the head. See this? For like a half second, right? He resets that default animation like nothing is going on, like he's concussed, and he just stands there, which would be cool if that's just a mechanic. However, that works based on the level of Stagger, and that is applicable to all classes. So the Shout from the Veteran, which does stagger bosses backwards bodily, it knocks him backwards and it puts him into that animation, or the lack of animation rather. He'll stand there dumbfounded for a full half second, and that doesn't seem like a lot of time, but for bosses whose whole priority is to like stay on the move, stay aggressive, stay in your face, if you can just basically cripple them, make them unable to move or do anything and stand perfectly still for a full second or a half second, that's a really, really big deal. And it's an even bigger deal when you use the Ogun's charge here. So watch this. This is, I'm not, like, that's real time, right? He stands still and is like brain dead for 2 full seconds. And this is super, super problematic on not that demon host, but the actual demon host that's like the non-ritual version. Enemies like that really rely on being mobile, like the Chaos Spawn, like the demon host here. This enemy is really only threatening because it's so mobile. It can stay on you, can stay aggressive. But if you can just do this to it, and it stands still for this long, that thing is toast, right? They don't actually fundamentally have that much HP. So this is just started within the last patch, and I was actually doing some testing to see which enemies it's applied to, because initially I just thought it was like plague ogres and maybe chaos spawns, and I found one enemy that it doesn't apply to, but might be the solution at the bottom of this, might be the reason why this is happening. So maybe this has a little bit of a pointer towards the solution here, and that is the newest enemy added to the game, this guy, the Ogren Houndmaster. Now watch what happens when I hit him with a stun. He's knocked down to the ground, right? And he's unable to do anything until he gets back up. And suspiciously, at least to me, the amount of time that he spends on the ground there, stunned in that animation, is about the amount of time it takes for those other bosses to get back to what they were doing before. So what I suspect is that like something in the code that was added for this guy, because he's a lot easier to stagger than other bosses are, has like gotten added to all bosses as a core part of their code, and enables them to be stun locked, where he's the one who's supposed to get stun locked like that. He is supposed to be laying on the ground during that. Those guys don't have the lay on the ground animation, and so they just stand there like a doofus. And so yeah, I think that's a problem. Another minor bug that I want to submit to Fatshark is that there was a mention in the patch notes about this guy being added to the base game like very soon after release of Expeditions, and it must be a bug or something that I haven't seen him in there yet, so maybe he just needs to be toggled on. If you could look into that. Thanks. Okay. So let's move on to another stagger-based bug that has been in the game since its launch, and this is what I know is a bug because it was in something they patched out of Vermintide 2. And this is to do with the overwriting of stagger states. And you have 100% noticed this happening, but you probably just kind of assumed it was a basic core functionality. But I assure you that it is not, and it definitely makes no sense once you actually see it for what it is. So basically, right, this is your Crusher. A Crusher is a great example of an enemy this happens on a lot. I'm going to knock his ass off the ground. Okay, this is what it looks like when he gets back to feet normally. Okay, now let's do that same thing, but I'm gonna have another stagger hit him right after when I hit him to the floor. I'm gonna have him hit with a lower value stagger, such as by the dog bouncing off of him. Now I want you to note here, this dog does not have the dog talents that stun this guy. It doesn't have voltaic mandibles or anything. He's just gonna be slamming into him. So I'm gonna set the dog on him here. He's gonna bounce off of him, and then I'm gonna time the second one. You see that? He stands this Crusher back to his feet and re-enters him into those combat animations like right after the stagger happens. And so this happens with a ton of different mechanics. I did it a little bit too late there, but this happens with a ton of different mechanics in the game. It happens on Ogren as well, quite commonly, where, you know, Ogren, he has plenty of things that can stagger a Crusher to the floor, like this. But then he can taunt and the enemies all stand back up instantly. And so this isn't supposed to happen. These enemies should be staying in the full stagger animation. They should have to wait out that time on the floor. What's happening is that a lower state of stagger is overriding that high stagger state. And it doesn't happen though for characters who have things that are both in that high stagger value. So for instance, the Veteran, Shredder frag grenades will knock the Crusher to the ground, but so will Shout. So if you shredder to the grenades and knock the Crusher down, and then you shout, it doesn't stand him back up because both of those abilities are like level 3 or tier 3 stagger, and they would both knock the enemy down. So it doesn't overwrite. But for some reason, when it's like a different level of stagger, when it's a lower level of stagger, it'll set them into that one. And this is also very noticeable on the Zealot with Chorus, because the Zealot's Chorus is like a little tiny pulse that basically does like this, like it's just a little bop like that to enemies every time it pulses out, except for bosses who get forcibly pushed. But that little pulse is acting as a reset. So if enemies get exploded by, like, you got a Void Blast Psyker on your team and everybody's getting knocked down, and the Chorus Zealot walks through, he'll stand them all back on their feet. And it happens to captains very obviously too. When you break their shield and they're laying on the ground, if you chorus next to them, they'll immediately stand back up and they'll be on their feet and they'll be ready to fight. And that is definitely not intended. And let me point out right here, check this out. This is Vermintide 2 patch notes from way back in our Lord's year of 2022, March 2022. What date? March 15th, 2022. That's crazy. And right down here, where was it? Stagger. There it is. Stagger fix. Weak enemies no longer, or weak staggers no longer override strong staggers, which originally caused enemies to very suddenly stand up when knocked down. So this was fixed in Vermintide 2, 4+ years ago, and so it should be fixed in Darktide as well. That would really, really lend, some value to the actual staggers that you're applying, and not have this weird jank behavior. Okay. Next up, let's talk about another one of these enemies that has had a bug or something that has been mechanically weird about them since the dawn of the game, since they first came out, and that is the Flamer. So the Flamer is a very bizarre enemy in how it functions. One would think that like the flames would come out of the flamethrower and they would hit like very quickly at where you're at, starting from them and going outwards. And right here, that's what it looks like it is. However, note that when you are farther away from the Flamer, it does take longer to hit you, but the flames don't spawn over there. They just spawn in an area underneath where you were standing. And that's kind of at the core of the problem. One thing I do want you to note here though is that when the flamer's kind of close to me like this, listen to the time that it takes. You see that? Like that was the amount of time it takes when he's kind of close. Let's see how long it takes when he's far away. This is maximum distance. Okay, it took a lot longer, right? We can both agree that it took a lot longer for the flames to hit me at that long distance. But now let's add in some verticality here. Let's make the flamer be on a lower platform than we are. And first of all, the flamer can hit us at this angle, which makes no sense. The flamer immediately spawns, oops, I teleported one up here. The flamer immediately spawns flames underneath our feet, even though he has no angle to shoot underneath our feet. That's problem number one. That's jank and shouldn't functionally be happening. But problem number two here is I want you to feel the difference in time. Here's an example of a flamer who's like on the same platform as me. Okay, that's how long it takes to get hit with a flame that's spawn on the same level as me. Now let's spawn one below me, but at the same distance. It hits me almost immediately, right? As soon as that initial woof of the flame coming out of the flamethrower is over, it hits me. And here's the even worse part. If I spawn them at a longer distance, way back here, it still hits me almost instantaneously. And that is not, as a reminder, as a refresher, that is not how it functions on flat ground. Look at this delay, right? That delay is what enables you to see what's going on and get out of the way in time. A flamer who's spawned over here, first of all, that is way out of the range, but also it is shooting that flame and spawning underneath me almost immediately. So there's something very funky going on here with the way that those flames are spawning and the time delay between when they're spawning. And just put it in perspective, like that is where I was standing and this is where that flamer was shooting me from, right? Way over here. There's something going on. First of all, it's jank. They should not be able to put flames underneath your feet when you are at a higher elevation than them. And second of all, it's spawning underneath you nigh immediately, which is unavoidable damage for a lot of classes. And yeah, that sucks. So there you go. That's the jank with the flamer. Now we need to talk about some real big fish. We got two left, and these are the biggest and jankest of them all. And the next enemy that I want to talk about is a very, very insidious one indeed. This enemy has been jank forever, and it still has a very underlying, very critical bug that has the chance to ruin your games in a mere second. And that is, of course, the Burster. The Burster has this bug that I will call the JK Burster, where it doesn't actually intend to explode, or maybe it does and it just doesn't trigger it. So as a refresher on how the burst is supposed to function, they will choose a target when they spawn, and then they will path towards that target, and then when they enter into a certain range, they'll initiate their dive. And during that dive, that initiation of dive is very important, because once they have initiated that, when that like hissing noise goes off and you give them a push, well, if I did it correctly, then they can be pushed backwards and then they will detonate. And that's the way you're supposed to get rid of bursters, right? You're supposed to bait them into jumping at you and then you push them. And it's very easy to push them because when they jump, they have a massively increased hitbox that is much, much easier for you to shove, and you get a big, big long radius on your shove. So like even a very low stagger weapon with a very small shove radius can hit them and will knock them back sufficiently to get away. So that's how you're supposed to counter bursters. However, if they don't initiate that dive, if, for instance, you know, I turn my invisibility on here and I have this burster next to me, well, then when I shove them, they do this, and they take like a full 3 seconds to stand back up, and then, only then, will they do the dive. Now, if you haven't seen this happening, that's okay. I happen to have gotten a clip of this happening from Xeno145. He is, in fact, not throwing this video. It's the bursters that are trying to do the throwing for him. Let's check it out. So, I suspect that the only reason that burster actually chose to detonate was because he had other players that were like trying to hit it and were pissing it off, more or less. But as you can see from this section here, he is well within the threatened range of this burster. To be an Ogren with that sort of thing on his screen there, he's standing this close to the burster. The burster, when it enters into that threatened range, jumps on you. That's how it's programmed, right? However, there are occasions where this, for whatever reason, doesn't trigger, and I suspected for a long time that this was a server-side issue. However, I watched Reginald's video on the subject a while back, and he actually got this to happen in solo play, which means that it is not something that is related to server-side. It just happens kind of infrequently across all sorts of games. However, I do notice a significant uptick in this occurring on high-level, high-intensity games. It seems like it crops up more when there's a lot of stuff going on. So this leads me to suspect that I might have an idea of what's going on here. So yeah, let's first like kind of diagram. This is our burster and this is the radius of the burster. Here is our player character that they're going to be seeking towards, and this is a wall, this is a corner that this character is covering behind. So one thing, let's just go ahead and talk about the basics here. The burster paths towards its target, intended target, and then it will get within that radius, that threatened radius, which tends to sort of align with its explosion radius, as you saw painted by the Danger Zone mod in my Psychanium there, and then it will initiate its fuse and it'll jump and it'll blow up on the target, right? That's the goal. So that initiation of the fuse happens when it crosses that certain boundary. However, as you saw, it'll still initiate the fuse when it's in here too. If you like, you know, teleport in or you appear inside of its threatened radius, it'll make the dive on you then too. So something is happening. Oh, and by the way, this occurs, like, this is the same reason that with a corner like this, if the burster is on the outside of the corner and it comes up to here, it detects you there and it will jump, and it can actually turn in midair and path to you, because bursters can path when they're mid-jump. So somehow they can do like a full 360 in the air. It's pretty crazy. So yeah, the bursters can see you through walls. They're detecting you with their, I don't know, I guess their sonar from their clicking time bomb or whatever. So yeah, that's the functionality that's supposed to work, but instead what is happening is somewhere along the way, the burster is like doing a check to see if you're there, and it clearly knows you're there, right? In the case of Xeno's clip, it knows he's there. It is following him around. But, and I've seen it happen to other players, I've seen it happen in my games as well, if you don't do anything, and if you just face the burster, it will literally just walk inside of your hitbox and just stand there. It will just stand there. It doesn't know, it loses that somewhere along the line. It like skips over that part of the directive in its programming. Oh, I am close enough to this guy, I should be initiating the timer. And my only guess is that this has something to do with the check on like the location of the player. So when it gets to here and it's like, okay, check on location of player. Am I close enough, or like, am I close enough to detonate? Or like, you know, are they within this coordinate radius? And maybe the check goes off at the wrong time. It goes off too late and they're instead here, or they're instead outside of it. Then it's like, oops, well, not in the correct radius, cancel detonation, seek for them again. But then it forgets to have that phase where it's like, okay, I found them again, reinitiate the detonation, right? One thing that you'll notice though is that when you have a burster that's following you around like this, that like is refusing to detonate and doing this sort of thing, if someone pushes them and knocks them down to the ground, then when they get up, they will 100% guaranteed detonate on the next one. I have literally never, in hundreds of hours since this bug has been, you know, sort of in the game, I have never seen one refuse to detonate after that first time being shoved. So there is something about them being shoved to the ground that like resets their state, that like kind of clears their stupid and gets them to be primed for the detonation. there's some sort of like flag or check that this like sets. It kind of like pisses them off, sets them into a higher state where they are going to detonate, and oftentimes they will just choose the closest target to affix on then. So maybe it's something to do with the initial target they choose and their location as compared to the initial location that it was. There is, I've got some people who are looking into this now. TDops, one of my modders, is like looking into this and, has made a mod to detect when the burster is locked onto you to try and sort this out. But maybe it's something to do with like location position on the map of like your XYZ value, and like the burster can't get a fix on you in certain locations, because Reginald insinuated in his video that it tends to happen to him in the same spots over and over and over again on these maps, which would be a pretty interesting thing if that was happening. So no exact clue as to why this is going on. However, I can sort of point you in the general direction if Fatshark is watching. This started occurring, I would say, it's definitely pre-Hive Scum, and it, I believe, was not happening in the post-Arbites state. So my guess is that this one cropped up around the fall update last year, during the, I can't remember what it was called, but the Zealot, Psyker, and Veteran rework update. With the Mortis Trials maps. Like that is when I believe this was added to the game. You can comment down below, by the way, if you remember this happening prior to that, or if it definitely didn't happen until after Hive Scum. I definitely remember it being an issue pre-Hive Scum era. But yeah, that's the really big problem with bursters, and I don't know what the issue is there. But let's end on one that I do have a lot better of idea of why is happening, and we're going to continue with our multimedia presentation here, because I've got a great example of this one. This is the Captain Shield bug, and you might have not ever had this happen to you, but if you continue playing enough Havoc, if you continue playing Chasm Station Terminus, eventually you will have this happen, and this is a crazy and devastating one. Let's watch. Alright, here's where we just do our thing. I forgot about all this stuff was coming. Fortunately, we are in our natural habitat here, which is forced into a corner with a bunch of bullshit. Oh my god, the Captain Shield bug. Okay, cool. Okay, so what the fuck just happened, right? This captain exploded its shield with this animation right here. It does this like throwing out his arms animation. This instantly kills me and who else? The Psyker, who were at full HP, literally instantaneously downs us without damaging our toughness, right? So this bug is bizarre, and if you've had it happen to you before, you might have been thinking, oh, I got hit by something else, right? But no, it is in fact the captain's doing that animation, detonating his shield like that does this. And as far as what caused this, I think I have a very comprehensive idea of exactly why this happens. And the first clue should be the cause of death. If you have any sort of like Power DI or one of the sort of mods that can tell you how you died or how you took damage, the cause of death in this instance is fall damage. That makes no sense, right? Because if you look, we do not fly anywhere. We literally die on the spot. We are not moved even 1 inch by this explosion. We literally die exactly where we were standing the second prior, so it doesn't fling you at all. However, what is important to consider here is what happened previously in this mission. And in this mission, I'll let you know the context, because I played this mission. I and this player and the Zealot were all dead prior to this arena, and this is the arena at the end of HL7004 with the Coliseum, right? We're in that Coliseum fight where you do the holdout, and the Ogren dragged this captain and these bosses across the entire level. He solo clutched and ran this entire level. So let's go to a very expertly drawn diagram of this level. So this is where we were, up here in the sewers. If you are picturing this level, right? There's an elevator ride down, and then that's where we died. We died in this sewer section. After you finish the sewer section, there's a broken hole in the wall. You drop down onto a small little catwalk. You cross across. There's a big set of stairs that goes down a little alley, and then you can see the Coliseum from there, right? You progress across this open area, you go down 2 small flights of stairs, you cross the bridge, you go up a small flight of stairs, you go into the airlock, and then you go into the Coliseum and you do the drop down into the basement of the Coliseum, and you have your fight, right? And that is where this death happened. So what's going on here, right? Well, fundamentally what's going on is the game is taking into account fall damage. And how the game calculates fall damage is it knows your XYZ position. It knows you're like, okay, you're like this far this way, you're this far up and down, and I can't do the third dimension because it's not a 2D plane. So you get it. But this guy, right, if he was picked up by a chaos spawn, and let's say he's picked up on the top of this flight of stairs and then flung down here, well, the game does some quick maths and it says, okay, well, his previous position was here, actually probably closer to up here because he's being held by the chaos spawn, and he ended up down here. You will now take this much fall damage. Same as you would take if you just jumped that distance, right? So if you fell, the game does some subtraction. It says, okay, you fell that far, you take this much damage. What's happening in our situation is that because we died back here, for whatever reason, the game is preserving our up and down. I can't remember if that's called like Y or Z in like, 3D like coding language or whatever, but this is where it thinks we are elevation wise. And then as the ogre runs through our level, we get teleported over to here in the Colosseum. So when he picks us up, we are still, for whatever reason, for all intents and purposes for the game, we're like floating in the air in part of its code. And the way that you can avoid this bug, if you want to never have this happen to you, is every time you see a captain, jump one time. When you jump, it resets your like stable footing, more or less. It like makes you touch the floor. I think it also happens when you mantle or like fall off a small ledge or whatever. Those things all like update where you are vertically for the game, and so now when the captain does his pop, you don't get hit with it, and you don't get hit with damage. Now this is weird though, because like, okay, if the game is preserving your vertical like location from when you died to when you respawned way the heck back here, well then why does like falling off a small box not just immediately break your shins and shove them up into your torso, right? TBD, no one knows. It is only the captain that does this. So my suspicion is that the captain has some sort of weird like priority, like order of operations in his how he does his damage, right? Because the shield is supposed to knock you back, right? And then if you were flung off of an obstacle and you fell down, then you would do that calculation and see, hey, did they fall down a thing? Would they take damage from that? But for whatever reason, it is calculating the damage first, and it's taking like a wrong value on where you are vertically positioned because you haven't updated it. So I think that one of the players in that, the Zealot survives, and I would guess that he probably either too far away from the explosion or he had jumped in somewhere in that combat before the captain showed up, and that had reset his floor state. And if you've ever had this happen to you, I would bet that it happened at Chasm Station Terminus. If you're picturing this is the train station map where you fight the captain at the end, which is for a lot of players like one of the only times they encounter captains because they don't play a lot of Havoc. And there's also a big ass elevator ride just prior to it, and there's a teammate respawn at the bottom. So if you have dead teammates, you go down the elevator ride and you pick up your dead teammates at the bottom, and if they don't jump and that captain goes into the fight with them, he'll shield burst and they'll immediately get killed, and it'll happen like clockwork. And so there's something going on there. So that is such a weird, bizarre bug. Many of you have probably never seen it, but now you have seen it happen firsthand. I thought that was such a great clip when I got it. I was like, yes, but also fuck. And we went on to lose that game. Isn't that epic? So yeah. Well, there you go. So there is some really, really juicy bugs. Hopefully Fatshark has fun digging into those. I would be thrilled if some of those get addressed in the next patch. Please, 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 guys, comment your bugs down below. Thank you so much for helping me to find these and pointing me in the right direction. It's really fun to test these. It's a little bit frustrating at times, but I got my community backing me up, and big appreciation to all of ya. Thank you. See you next time. Good luck out there. Bye-bye.